Hey guys, Max here, and this is your daily market update for yesterday, the 30th of January. We're going to talk about the situation in Yemen with the UAE, the Canadian truck protest, and just a couple other things, so let's just get right into it. Now, for the markets that were open, what actually happened? Well, in crypto, it's been more of the same. We saw a very slight decline across the board. Bitcoin and Ethereum are still sitting around $37,000 and $2,500 each, so a little bit higher than we are used to seeing them from a week ago. Altcoins, as usual, have seen less support, and a bunch of them are still losing value as well. Cardano is sitting at about $1 per coin, about to drop below that. Solana is sitting at about $90, and Luna is sitting at about $45. Now, if we're expecting crypto markets to be a bellwether for the Nasdaq or risk on assets in general, then we might expect them to have a slightly bad day today, but nothing too major. Maybe a 0.5% decline across the board, unless of course there is some other news that comes out that actually outweighs this sentiment. Now, actually speaking of crypto, I do have a Stoic crypto channel, but I haven't had the time to upload on it for the last few months, but I'm thinking of doing crypto world updates like I do on this channel, probably looking in detail at a piece of news for each video 2 or 3 times a week, something like the fact that Russia is going to be regulating crypto, not banning it, or the start of Sunday swap on Cardano that we saw a couple weeks ago. So if that sounds interesting, if you want those kind of videos, then tell me down below in the comments and go and subscribe to that channel as well. Now, the big thing to talk about today is the pretty crazy story behind the protests in Canada regarding vaccines for truck drivers. Now, for some background, it's sort of been called the Freedom Convoy, and it's been going on for about a week now. This convoy of mostly truck drivers, but lots of other people who work in different areas as well, have been driving across Canada with a bunch of big rigs. It was pretty much just being entirely ignored by mainstream media, but the last few days they've started to pick up on it as it's just getting a little bit too big to ignore anymore. Now, it began as a movement to oppose a vaccine mandate specifically for truckers crossing the US and Canada border that Trudeau put in place earlier in the month. Basically, truck drivers who cross the border and who weren't vaccinated have to be quarantined once they get home, which is obviously very limiting for those truck drivers. Now, it started off as just a specific convoy to oppose that single mandate, but as is so often the case with protests and movements like this, a big part of it is just now anti-vaccine mandates as a whole, anti-COVID restrictions as a whole, and anti-Trudeau as well. He is not a very popular man right now. His refusal to even recognise that this protest exists isn't exactly doing much to tame the protests either, as it comes across as just very arrogant. This convoy then has been all over social media. It's been covered by loads of independent journalists and people who make YouTube videos and things like that. But again, mainstream media has mostly just been ignoring it all happening as well. As it's picked up more steam though, more and more countercultural figures have been showing their support for it. Joe Rogan, obviously in the news a lot for Spotify stuff recently. He's been talking about it, as has Elon Musk, and even Trump has been on it as well. Now, of course, it's been making its way east, the convoy that is, and it's been a pretty reasonable protest for the most part. It seems very peaceful and it's certainly well targeted as well. Now, the police have said that they are concerned because the convoy has attracted extremist rhetoric, which I haven't seen any evidence of, to be honest. If there is some that you've seen out there, please send it to me, but to be honest, I can't find any. They've also said that they're worried about it all getting violent, but it's been going on for a week now, and it's been the most peaceful and reasonable protest I've seen for a while. It's going to culminate right in the centre of Ottawa. Trudeau has decided to evacuate himself from the city as he's terrified of this violent mob of deplorables, which is wholeheartedly pathetic. Now, that's what the protest is and what's it about, but there are actually serious problems with this mandate that most people aren't really talking about. Now, firstly, let me say that the crux of the issue seems to be around the freedom to live as you wish and not be forced to take a vaccine, which, if you go back 3 years, was the default position for everyone. As for my views on this issue, well, vaccine mandates are immoral, but more than that, they just don't actually make sense anymore. The argument used to be that everyone needed to get the vaccine so that we'd get herd immunity and so that the virus would die out. And this was all based on the idea that if you get the vaccine, you wouldn't catch the disease, so you wouldn't spread it to other people. The problem is, it hasn't worked that way at all. Pretty much every first world nation is now 90% double or even triple jabbed, and the virus is still present everywhere. The argument that you need to be vaccinated to protect other people just doesn't hold any water anymore. You can and will still catch and spread it to others if you're vaccinated. You're just far less likely to be seriously ill or killed by the virus yourself. To me, that means it's perfectly clear that the vaccine should be a personal decision and that there should be no mandates. Now, that is my position on the first part of it, the most popular bit, the bit that everyone talks about, but there is another huge problem with Trudeau's new vaccine mandate for truckers, and it lies around inflation. Now, of course, there are supply-side shortages and impacts in every country in the world, and Canada is not immune to these problems. They've had really high inflation recently, just like everywhere else, and one of the supply-side shocks has been a lack of truck drivers. Things need to be driven from one place to another. It's pretty simple, and if they aren't moved, then we can't buy them, and truck drivers are absolutely needed, and also in very short supply. Now, this vaccine mandate is expected to kick between 10 and 20% of Canada's truck drivers out of work and stop them from driving, which is going to make the inflation problem in Canada so much worse. There will be fewer products on the shelves and stores will raise prices to make up for that. And this is the fault of Trudeau. This is just mostly being ignored by the left. They don't really want to talk about this because there isn't really an argument against it. Inflation always hits the poorest people the hardest. It hits those who live paycheck to paycheck hardest. And the left is supposed to care about those people. The problem is they just don't. Now, the other thing that I'm seeing a lot from this protest is the left revealing just how much they actually hate the working class. Leftists love to talk about worker solidarity and hard working class folk who push the world around, without whom we wouldn't be able to live as we do. But the second those working class people speak for themselves, a tirade of vitriol is spouted out from young woke university students who claim to be the new working class purely because they have a degree in gender studies and are unemployed. Now, I saw the exact same thing go on in the UK over Brexit as the working class of the country had their vote. They chose to leave the EU, and suddenly the left and the Labour Party revealed just how much they actually hated those people. Now, in the UK, it actually led to the Labour Party's worst election defeat in almost 100 years. And if certain other parties in certain other countries around the world aren't careful, I suspect they might see something similar. Now, that is pretty much it for this story, to be honest. I hope this protest is successful. I hope those on the protest are safe and able to return home soon. And I hope that those who voted for Trudeau think about these events next time an election comes around. Now, moving eastwards over to the United Arab Emirates, and we've just seen an escalation in a conflict that has actually been going on for years now, specifically in Yemen. Now, basically, there's been a civil war in Yemen for the last 8 years, and one side, the Houthi rebels, is opposed by a Saudi-led coalition, which includes the UAE, or United Arab Emirates. Now, for the most part, the conflict has remained in Yemen, but the other day, Houthi rebels attacked an oil depot in the UAE and killed 3 people. This seems to be an attempt to pressure the UAE to cut back its involvement in the war. Now, attacks on Saudi Arabia are actually really quite common. The countries share a border, but the UAE has sort of been seen as a safe area in regards to the war. I mean, it's a major tourist destination despite the civil war nearby, but this attack threatens to change that. Biden is now being pressured to designate the Houthi rebels as a terrorist organization, which would make it harder for them to receive aid and support, something that Trump actually did while he was in power. As of yet, though, the war hasn't really reached mainstream attention, and there's no guarantee that it will. There have been some pushes here in the UK in particular to cut ties with Saudi Arabia over the killings of civilians in Yemen, and there's probably been some similar calls in the US as well, but there's no way either government is going to do that because geopolitics and a bunch of other things, the idea being that the Saudi government provides stability to the region, and there's also the fact that Western companies sell quite a lot of missiles to Saudi Arabia, and it makes them quite a lot of money which our governments don't want to stop flowing. Now, it is possible that this conflict escalates. It's far too early to tell if it will, but if I were the UAE, I would be terrified of attacks on tourist parts of the country. If a bomb hit Dubai, the city itself, a hotel or a restaurant, I'd wager a guess that the tourism industry would instantly be shattered, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Houthis did that in an attempt to drive the UAE out of the conflict. I will of course keep my eye on this, and if it escalates, you will all be the first to know. Now, regarding Spotify and that whole Joe Rogan saga, it doesn't really seem to be going away, but there are some misconceptions that I feel I just need to correct quickly. Now, the big one here is the idea I've been seeing pushed by people who have no interest in finance or investing, and it's that Spotify lost $4 billion worth of value because Neil Young removed his music from the site, and this is just categorically untrue. Of course, we know on this channel all about the hyped up tech companies that have been getting hammered for 6 months now, and Spotify is one of those companies. Its share price was down 40% before any of this nonsense started, and now it's fallen another 2%, obviously about concerns regarding monetary tightening, and sadly, not concerns about the loss of listeners due to Neil Young leaving. Now, another artist has actually removed their music, this time Joni Mitchell. Again, I haven't heard of her. I didn't even know it was a her until I googled her name for this video even. Now, I'm sorry to have to say this, but she and Neil as well are just not influential enough to actually damage Spotify monetarily. Joni literally gets 3.7 million listens a month, and I get about 3 million views on YouTube alone. Now, I'm under no delusion that YouTube cares about me or my channel at all, or that I can change the behavior of a multi-billion-dollar company like YouTube, but the same cannot be said for these two. Now, Rogan is still there, he's still on Spotify, and it looks like he's there to stay, and Spotify have actually done pretty well in trying to avoid being forced to censor free speech, and I'm actually quite impressed by them. They are putting a disclaimer about COVID on the app for people who go and watch these sort of podcasts, like a little thing you get under some YouTube videos here, but I really don't care about this at all. The company is free to say what they like, just as long as they don't go around censoring free speech. Now, my point on free speech is pretty simple. It's an innate human right that no one else has the right to curb, and if a certain view is so deplorable or wrong, then your arguments against it ought to be strong enough to defeat that view without the threat of state-sanctioned violence being necessary. If your only argument is to scream until someone is shut down, then you have no argument. Now, for full transparency, I still haven't listened to the Joe Rogan podcast. I've never made it through an entire podcast. I've tried to listen to a couple of them over the years, but I get about 10 minutes into an episode before I give up because it just isn't that interesting to me. But that doesn't mean I should be okay with it being silenced. I also want to say, just before we end, that it is pretty weird how aggressive some people are getting about this all. I've had some comments telling me to die of horse dewormer because apparently the fact that I support free speech means that I just take the exact same drugs as Joe Rogan. Again, I don't even listen to his podcast, it's just not my thing, and I am vaccinated as well. I just believe it should be everyone's choice whether or not they get jabbed, but the fact that people literally want other people to die purely because of their own medical choices is insane. You people need to take a step back. It's not that deep. You need to chill out and relax and accept that you can't control what other people do. You can only control what you do yourself. That is it for the day. We will be back tomorrow, of course. If you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. But I will just quickly say to wait to join until tomorrow, the 1st of February, or you will be double charged by Patreon. I'm sorry, it's just a policy of theirs and it's not something I can change. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, you don't have to buy anything, you don't have to hand over any card information, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you'll get from any savings account these days. Just make sure not to use Tether. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.